But the issue of Bibi's interesting because he's got his own domestic issues. He's trying to stay out of jail. He's got folks, the hard line, that want to annex the West Bank. I mean, Freeman and others are talking about it appropriately, sort of an apartheid state.
Do you think, looking down the road, that the United States should consider maybe, rethinking our military support for Israel?
It breaks my heart because the current leadership in Israel is walking us down that path, where I don't think you have a choice but that consideration.
You just heard Gavin Newsom, of all people, say that it's appropriate to call Israel an apartheid state and concede that it's time to reconsider our military support for them. That is a very big deal. Did we just enter the Twilight Zone? That's really significant. And sure, he's doing the typical political maneuver where he tries to scapegoat Netanyahu and make it seem like it's all about him, even though Israel was an apartheid state before he came to power. But regardless, it is still very, very significant for the quintessential establishment Democrat to say what we just heard, especially because Gavin Newsom is a political ditto. And for the non-nerds in the audience, ditto is a type of Pokemon that can take the form of other Pokemon and even humans. And that's exactly what Gavin Newsom does. If he's speaking to a more progressive audience, he'll take the form of Bernie Sanders. If he's talking to a more right-leaning audience, then, he's going to transform into Ron DeSantis and go full transphobe if he needs to. The man is a shape-shifting political chameleon. So when the political ditto, that is Gavin Newsom, takes the form of Mamdani and takes a sharp anti-Israel turn, that is a sign that the political winds are changing, my friends, which is interesting. It's really interesting, seeing as how 4 months ago on the Higher Learning podcast, he said that he supported conditioning aid to Israel, but was vehemently opposed to cutting them off entirely. And he had this interesting reaction when Van Lathan brought up AIPAC.
AIPAC. I will not vote for a candidate that takes $1 from AIPAC.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I haven't thought about AIPAC. And it's interesting. You're like the first to bring up AIPAC in years, which is interesting.
Why?
Why did I say that? Not relevant to my day-to-day life.
Okay.
Which is just interesting.
Listen.
It's interesting you say that. JPAC perhaps more, but AIPAC less and less.
Okay. Fair enough.
Which is just interesting.
What's interesting about it?
That it's just interesting as you bring up AIPAC that it hasn't been part of, I'm just reflecting quite openly and honestly, hasn't been part of the day-to-day.
See, I find it interesting that he thinks it's interesting to bring up an influential lobbying group that, interestingly enough, bankrolls politicians who support Israel unconditionally and destroys the careers of ones who don't. It's just, for lack of a better word, interesting that he thinks we wouldn't want to know who's funding the lawmakers that enthusiastically support genocide. But Gavin Newsom's ostensible heel turn here isn't the result of a sudden concern for Palestinians or anger over the fact that Israel goaded us into another war with Iran. He's saying what he's saying because it is officially more politically expedient for Democrats to oppose Israel than it is for them to support Israel. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he's pivoting days after a shocking poll found that more Americans now sympathize with Palestinians over Israelis, which Axios called a striking shift in public opinion. And it happened extremely fast, mind you, with support for Israel falling 10 points in the last year and their overall favorability dropping to near historic lows in Gallup's polling. And the general change in this trend is being fueled by political independents who simply don't support a country that's doing a genocide. But among Democratic voters, Israel is doing far worse, with just 17% of Democrats siding with Israelis over Palestinians. And as Zed Jelani puts it, to give you a sense of how few Democratic voters are sympathetic to Israel right now, the percentage who want to ban abortion is roughly the same. And he points to a 2024 poll that shows that 14% of Democrats think abortion should be illegal, meaning support for Israel and abortion bans are polling within the margin of error of each other. In other words, it is over for Israel. There's no coming back from this. Being anti-Israel has to be the default position for any Democrat going forward who wants to be politically viable, and Gavin Newsom is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. If that opportunist thinks that Israel is going to tank his career, that means that the rest of the party is going to see the writing on the wall too very soon. And even though they're not going to admit this, party leadership also knows that this is the case. It's why Hakeem Jeffries is desperately trying to obfuscate AIPAC's support for him, and why AIPAC is is having to funnel money to genocide supporting Democrats through proxies so they won't tank the campaigns of Democrats that they're supporting, as was the case with Democrat Valerie Fauci in North Carolina, who lied about AIPAC not supporting her in order to survive a primary against her progressive opponent, Nida Alam, who was hammering her for supporting Israel. As Politico reports, the new anti-AIPAC group, American Priorities PAC, was the single largest advertising spender in the race, and it made up the majority of pro-Alam advertising spending. And Alam and her allies leaned into the topic. Every single ad supporting her over the last week has mentioned AIPAC, and that forced Fauci to go on the offensive and downplay her previous support for Israel by condemning their indiscriminate killings while not calling it a genocide, and by bragging about how she didn't attend Netanyahu's joint address to Congress, even though she just met him in March of 2024 as part of a trip organized by AIPAC. But sadly, at the time that I record this, Fauci is actually ahead of Alam, although she's only ahead by about 1,200 votes, and the race still hasn't been called yet at the time of this recording, and Axios reports that the race is so close that it's in recount territory. But regardless of the outcome here in this race, it speaks to how Democrats are finally having to answer for their support of a genocidal regime now that the political winds have shifted. And Fauci is just one example, mind you. Politico reports that other Democratic incumbents in primary races in Illinois, Texas, and Michigan are also being dragged down by their support for Israel, and their primary opponents are using even small connections to Israel's political leaders to hit their opponents. In the 9th District of Illinois, the frontrunner, Daniel Biss, has been forced to feign opposition to Israel since Palestinian progressive cat Abu Ghazala is nipping at his heels. But since Biss is no longer feigning unequivocal support for Israel, AIPAC is boosting his opponent Laura Fine through another proxy, this time it's Elect Chicago Women, to punish Biss for not supporting Israel enough, which could elevate Abu Ghazala in the same way that Mejia was elevated in New Jersey's 11th District after AIPAC spent against Tom Malinowski to punish him for saying that he would condition aid to Israel. So AIPAC is trying to get Democrats to hold the line and scare them into compliance by punishing their puppets who deviate even a little bit from their pro-Israel agenda, because if Democrats really do start winning races because they're abandoning Israel, the dam could soon burst open, and that could become the new norm in the party, and that's what AIPAC is desperately trying to prevent from happening. But try as they may, it's too fucking late. Not only because public opinion has changed, but because for the first time ever, pro-Palestinian groups and progressive groups in general are finally able to monetarily compete in DC. And aside from that, a lot of grassroots progressive candidates are just really good at raising money via small grassroots donations. And as Axios reports, Democratic Party leadership is actually pissed off because their loyal incumbents are having to fight for their lives in primaries when they were a walk in the park in the past cycles, but that's because primary opponents are crushing it when it comes to fundraising. Primary challengers and 30 different races have raised more than $100,000, including pro-Palestinian progressives like Elijah Manley, Cori Bush, and Michael Blake. But it's not just Democrats. Akila Lacey of The Intercept reports that pro-Palestinian groups are pulling a reverse AIPAC and spending big against Republicans in order to exploit the growing rift in their party between older, more pro-Israel conservatives and younger, more anti-Israel conservatives. And we're starting to see a new brand of Democrat emerge that isn't afraid to take strong moral positions. For example, Pastor Frederick Haynes just won the primary in Jasmine Crockett's former district in Texas, and he does not mince words when it comes to Palestinian human rights, unlike other bitch-ass Democrats.
I'm about to lose you because I recognize that we got to be pro-Israel. Yeah, we got to do that, or we get in trouble. Well, I'm coming to get in trouble. Israel, and I'm going to quote Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter says that Israel is engaging in apartheid with Palestinians. And so the Palestinians who don't have the weaponry of Israel, the Palestinians don't have the financial backing from the United States that Israel has. And so they throw their rocks and shoot their arrows, and Israel is able to bomb them and kill them. Watch in the news the disparity between Palestinians being killed and Israelis being killed. It is totally unfair, but this country is going to stand on the side of apartheid because that's its track record. It stood by apartheid in South Africa because it created apartheid in this country.
That guy is almost certainly going to be a United States congressman. Hell fucking yeah. So we're watching a paradigm shift happen in real time, and I think that the Democratic Party's unconditional support for Israel, even during a genocide, really was the straw that broke the camel's back, because as Ta-Nehisi Coates put it, we are at a moment right now where people are asking themselves, why can't the Democratic Party defend this assault on democracy? And I would submit to you that if you can't draw the line at genocide, you probably can't draw the line at democracy. Exactly. But even though Israel was the breaking point, the base has been fed up with Democrats who constantly kowtow to corporations and Republican fascists for a very long time. And as a result, we're finally starting to see a Democratic Party Tea Party take shape, where every incumbent is having to answer for their complicity with the status quo. Case in point, a state legislator in North Carolina got blown the fuck out by her primary opponent and lost by 50 points after she went full fascist and joined Republicans to override the Democratic governor's veto of an anti-immigrant bill and subsequently attacked immigrants. Well, guess what? She fucked around and found out, because voters are paying close attention to everything that their elected officials are doing. And this kind of complicity with fascists of any kind, be it Republicans or Zionists, is not going to be tolerated by the Democratic base any longer. So even though leftists don't get too many electoral wins, I think it's safe to say that we've already won this battle politically. We've beaten the genocide-supporting wing of the Democratic Party. And now it's just a matter of making sure that they are permanently purged from the party, one by one, at every chance that we get. And don't get me wrong, it's good to see them at least pretend to oppose Israel, because that's them basically conceding that they were wrong and we were right. The problem, however, is that they still can't be trusted ever again. Because if you supported a genocide because of bribes you took or because you thought that it was politically convenient, you can never be trusted ever again. It's the easiest moral test of all time, and you failed. So it doesn't matter that Gavin Newsom is willing to call Israel an apartheid state now. His support for Israel throughout their genocide is disqualifying permanently. And like it or not, this is our party now. And if you can't pass the genocide test, strike 1, 2, and 3, you're fucking out. And if you're a Democrat who was lucky enough to eke out a victory after you supported a genocide, that's fine for you, but count your days, because they're numbered.